Okay. Well, welcome, Adriana, to the Sales Transformation Podcast. It's taken us a while to get here, hasn't it?
It has, Phil, but thank you so much for having me. Life gets in the way of the fun things, doesn't it?
It certainly does, but it's still a pleasure to have you here after some months of trying to get you on the podcast. I know that we kind of originally reached out to you because your name surfaced as one of those in Sales Enablement to watch in the future from some publication we saw. And so we've been delighted that we've been able to invite you to come and sort of share a little bit about you and your experiences. Adriana, what we tend to do on this before we get sort of stuck in the detail is we tend to start with giving our listeners a chance to get to know you.
Okay.
And I wonder if before we got started, whether into the main topic around, sort of sales enablement and the future of sales enablement and so on, is to maybe share a little bit about your personal background. Where did you start off in life? How did you come to be in Canada? Because I know that you haven't been there all your life, and perhaps
Mm,
you could just share with us your backstory.
that's great. How long do we have? I'm kidding. Um, Thank you, Phil. So, a little bit of my backstory, as you said, I was not born in Canada. I was actually born in Venezuela. So I came to Canada 17 years ago. People ask me, why did you leave a tropical paradise to come and endure Canadian winters? And the answer is very simple. The political landscape of my country is not the best. If, sometimes in the news we get
Mm,
some shine upon it, and it is not the most positive news. So when I was younger and I had graduated university, I was starting my career. I said, could this not be the place where I'm going to fulfill my dreams? I always had dreams of doing something that might have been a little bit more different than what I had available. I studied systems engineering, and what I really wanted to do was process improvement. I thought I was going to work in supply chain. I saw myself with a hard hat and some boots and working in a warehouse.
mm,
Funny enough, I ended up working in tech for companies that installed warehouse management systems. So, in a way, I kind of fulfilled my supply chain dream. I started what now is called a business analyst. That was the first thing I did in my career. And interesting enough, my career took a lot of twists and turns where I have experience in the beer industry, I have experience in the retail industry, and ended up here in Canada where I was able to once again kind of like streamline my career into the tech industry. But, when we're young and we're looking for what do we want to do after we graduate, we think I have to get everything aligned. It has to be perfect. I studied this. When I look back and I look at all those experiences, I see how I bring each one of those things that I did to what I do today.
mm,
Sometimes, even when I used to be in the sales floor and I used to talk about examples, I remember bringing in examples of me, working in a shift where we were doing beer sales and how we did it and how we could compare the things that we did with the stores to what my reps were doing with their calls. So, because I know
mm.
that this is a program that's heard by people that might be early in their career and they're thinking about, now I'm going into sales and what am I doing? Just let it go, let it be. You never know. Maybe that adventure, that weird position in a company that you never thought, you're like, what? But this is not what I set myself to. You're young.
Mhm.
Do it. Take a jump because you never know what's going to happen. So then I came to Canada. I started working in tech, and here I am. 17 years later, I worked in all tech companies, some startups, some scale ups, some very big tech companies like the one I am right now and the one I was before. And yeah, that's a little bit of a backstory of me.
Okay, that's great. Can I ask why Canada?
That's a great question. So, in the moment where I was looking with my previous partner, where should we go? We had a set of criteria of where we wanted to go. I wanted a place that was family oriented in terms of how people in the society was functioning. I wanted to be a mother. That was one thing I knew I wanted to
Mhm.
do. I wanted a place that felt that it was leading edge in things and thinking and technology and education and all those things. And I wanted a place where I would feel welcome. And that was the biggest thing for me. I'm not a visible minority being Latin American, but
Hmm.
Latin Americans are not very welcome in some places in the world. And I didn't want to feel that. Most importantly, I did not want my kids to feel that, right?
Okay.
Because parts of my family who have immigrated to other countries sometimes have felt, the non being welcome. So when we set out to look where, the possibilities were, depending on what and how we wanted to do the process. Australia and Canada were two places that were very welcoming, and they had a process
Hmm.
where you kind of went through a point system, and you said, okay, I have enough points and I can apply, and you could be a permanent resident. And it was very easy and straightforward. Australia was very far away. It was very great weather and it was perfect. But I'm like, when am I going to see my family? So we said, okay, Canada. Canada's like one straight, airplane ride of 5 hours from the capital of
Hmm.
Venezuela to here. And I applied. I got the residency. 1 year later, I had my visa stamped, and you're like, welcome to Canada. So it was like, why not?
Yes, that's an amazing story. I think it takes a huge amount of courage to, to up sticks in the way that you've done, and maybe you had little choice in your view. Yeah, because one reads about the political instability of Venezuela, and yeah, some terrible stories about the
Yeah,
situation there, to be honest. But even so, it still takes a hell of a lot of courage to decide you want to make your home somewhere else.
it is. It's not easy. I think I think courage, resilience
Hmm.
is something that, I compare it to it's very important, especially when you work in a sales role. It
Yeah,
is something that you need to have because it is
yeah,
tough,
yeah, yeah.
because it's difficult, but building that resilience, if you would ask me what is the one thing that you think a skill you should build, be resilient, because life is change.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
so pertinent for today's environment,
Mm-hmm.
which is changing so quickly and so ambiguous and so uncertain.
So
Can
uncertain.
can I just come back to? I mean, it's not often that you see people. Well, I suppose coming from an engineering background and training, perhaps computer engineering more so in the tech sector. But what was the point that made you decide to switch into? So what made you switch from sort of the engineering orientation to actually more customer facing?
That's a great question. So I think that there's two things, right? I studied a career. I graduated in 1998. So let's set,
Right.
kind of like the parameters. I know it will age me, but it's okay. When I graduated, remember the world was going to end in 1999. We didn't know what was going to happen. And all of us
Mhm.
who were studying a career that had to do with technology were very focused on how are we going to fix the two number issue with the year, right? And how are we
Yes. Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
go out in systems and do all this? So when I graduated, the tech kind of buzzword of the moment was ERP, and everybody and their mother was implementing an ERP. And the reason was they needed to get rid of legacy systems, do something that was,
Yeah.
implement the ERP that did more, but also overcome the issue that we had. I felt that I did not want to spend my life implementing things and just sitting behind a computer, which sounds very interesting because I was studying systems engineering.
Yeah.
But the reason why I studied systems engineering is that I felt that systems engineering was like being an industrial engineer, but instead of working with machines, I worked with computers.
Okay.
But I always had this inclination of being in front of people. I loved doing presentations. I was a teacher associate. Like I was the person in front of the classroom.
Okay.
So when the opportunity came and I came to this first role where I was, they hired me to be, and that point in time, they called us implementation consultants, but we were really business analysts, right? And I got a flavor of going into a customer site, seeing all the requirements, bringing them back to my company, and then doing the whole implementation and the training and all those things that were done back then. And I realized, wow, this is great when you get to meet people and really understand what is happening on their side. So I was in this company, and when you were in 1999 implementing software, it was very hectic because this was not cloud, this was on premise. We were
Hmm.
going to the sites, we were working till 3 in the morning. Things will not work. You had to do a re-implementation from disks into a server. And it was I had burnout. And I remember going into the office of the manager of the company and saying, you know what, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm just like 25. I need to have a life and I am burning out. And he actually told me, look, you know the product, you're very good in front of people. Would you consider coming and doing sales with me? And I'm like, sales? I don't know how to sell. He's like, don't worry. Don't worry about the sales portion. I need you to start doing, because he needed somebody to do the demos. Basically, I was doing like a solution engineer, but he said, but I will teach you the full cycle, how to do prospecting and all those things. So I'm like, oh, and so what do I have to do? And the guys like taught me how to manage what we had in that point. That was a CRM. We're talking Salesforce was just being created in that year. So what we
Hmm.
had was maybe Excel sheets or I don't know, I think it was not even an SQL kind of system that
Yeah.
was our CRM. I failed miserably in that job, Phil, miserably.
Okay.
I think I did not have maybe good coaching. I was great doing demos. I was amazing in front of the customer, but the sales process I was not good at. And I think it was, when I look back, it was a matter of there was no real sales process. But something there clicked me into saying, I failed here, but I like this. I want to keep doing this. I want to keep meeting people. And I got an inkling for doing sales. Some people are motivated because the commission check is big. Some people are motivated because,
Mm.
they're winning, and a lot of competitive people go to sales. I loved sales because my satisfaction was when I saw that there was a process issue in my customer, I knew I had the solution for them. So I came from it from a very engineering angle,
Mm.
right? And I think that was how I enjoyed doing sales. And that's how as I tell people, I went to sales by accident, like many of us have done. I
Hmm.
think it's very leading edge that there's a university or an institution that is giving sales as a formal training. But I love it. I love sales.
Mm.
What can I say?
That's great. So you sort of, I guess, over time you had perhaps different sales roles,
Mm,
and then you sort of found your way into the sales enablement space.
yes.
Could you just quickly chart the progression you made before within sales, before you decided sales enablement is an area to explore further?
So it was 15 years of sales career before I
Okay.
decided on sales enablement. And the reason why sales enablement is because I went on mat leave. And here in Canada, we have a year of mat leave, a year and a half.
Okay.
And I had a lot of time to think. And I had
Right.
gotten to a point of my career where I said, I want to do something more. But what is more in sales, right? Was it sales management? Was it to take a more, I don't know, enterprise selling role?
Yeah.
And I started to think that is not what I want. I did want to manage people, but I didn't want to do sales management. So I started in this internal quest of what is it that I want to do. I had been a full cycle account executive from prospecting to close. I
Yeah.
had been, a key account executive. I had been a category type account executive or a key account executive. I had been I have done every type of sales that you can imagine, I would say, except very big enterprise deals. I think that my biggest deals were not as big as maybe some of those that we hear from the big
Yeah.
tech companies. But big enterprise was not calling my attention. I had the opportunity in the company I was in at the time. So it was a very introspective moment for me of, if I'm going to leave sales, I said, what can I do that will keep me connected to the sales team but I'm not selling. That was actually my thinking.
Hmm.
And at that moment, I'm talking, this is 2015, 2016, 2015. Enablement was not what it is today,
Hmm.
right? Enablement was kind of like starting to become a word or a definition or a thing. There were sales operations, and we had sales trainers, but we didn't really have that figure of sales enablement. It was just kind of forming. So when I discovered that my company had a team that was called Sales Enablement, and this team came to give me a training, and I saw what they did. Oh, I fell in love. I fell head over heels over it.
Great. So, so that was your introduction to sales enablement. So, yeah. So what I agree. I mean, sales enablement is a term that has come to the fore, as you say, in the last maybe 10 years. But I think it's evolving, or it's evolved even within the 10 years
Yeah.
since we have. I believe in the UK, a strand of, it was originally the Sales Enablement Society. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You've got Santucci, is it, who was one of the founder members? They're
One
probably,
of the founding members. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yeah. I know there are many others, but I remember going to the first meeting, or one of the first meetings in London, and there was a group of people at the meeting. There must have been about 20 or 30, and most of the people in that room were people who were involved in some sort of CRM sort of systems implementation. I would
Mm-hmm.
say they weren't so much on the development side. It was more to do with how to leverage the systems to make sales forces more productive. But that was a long time ago.
It was.
But I would like, so you've been in sales enablement, and I guess in this role, has it been predominantly with one company, with a number of companies in this role? I mean, give us an idea of the sort of roles you've had within sales enablement.
So I started in this company where I was an account executive, and then I moved to enablement, and I did onboarding. So I was the program manager for onboarding, which was a
Okay.
great way to start an enablement because we all
Yeah.
know how that is, the
Yeah.
most important part. I moved from that company and I dipped my feet into startups. And what excited me about going to startups was I was going to create enablement in these startups.
Okay.
So these were startups that were just kind of setting up their
Yeah.
sales, teams,
Yeah.
and where VPs of sales said, "We need enablement," which was great because I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's not happening everywhere." So I had the opportunity to move to three. I went to three startups where
Okay.
I did, like, let me start up the enablement kind of practice. First startup was not that successful because they got acquired and there was a dismantling of the how the sales org works. So there was like a
Yeah.
whole thing there. Went to the
Yeah.
second startup, was very successful, was able to even have a team, had people underneath me. We were growing, and then the pandemic hit.
Okay.
The pandemic was a very interesting time for enablers, right? Because actually,
Yeah.
when the pandemic hit, Phil, I was onboarding a class. So
Okay.
those people, half of their onboarding was
Yeah. Yeah.
completely on Zoom.
Okay.
And then after that company, I went to another startup. Interesting enough, that startup built an enablement product. So I was the director of enablement for a company that sold an enablement product, and it was fascinating. It was great.
Okay.
If I have to say what was your favorite enablement role, was that one. Because all I
Okay.
did all day was either enable people or talk to enablers or have to be in enablement. It was like a kid in a candy store. That
Okay.
company got acquired. That company got acquired by Salesforce. So then I ended up in the one of the biggest tech companies in the world doing
Yeah.
enablement with very brilliant minds and a lot of people that are building enablement in that machine. So that's kind of the progression that I had in sales
Yeah.
enablement. Sales enablement is a career that just as we were talking about my immigration
Yeah.
story, you have to have that courage and that resilience to go get it, go build
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And if it fails, You just dust yourself off and you move to the next one.
So, I mean, you've obviously got a huge amount of experience in working with, startups and with large corporates. And, what have been some of your key learnings from the experiences that you've had?
Some key learnings. One is very important. If the sales leader or the leadership team of your company does not believe in what you're doing, you're going to fail. It
Okay.
does not matter how much work you put, how many hours, how many nights you don't sleep. If there's not a belief in the function,
Yeah.
you are going to fail. And it's not personal. It's not about your abilities. It is not
Okay.
about your intelligence. It is they're not going to believe in what you bring. So that's the first lesson. And if you feel or if you see that there's not a belief in enablement, get out of that company.
Can I just stop you there before you move on to
Yeah.
some of the other lessons? But because it's interesting that you've had experience with startups, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if these were venture capital or private equity led startups, but my experience of startups is that a number of them have been quite reluctant, to
Yeah.
properly invest in sales enablement
Mm-hmm.
because they just want to, recruit more salespeople. If we need to sell more, just recruit more salespeople.
Oh my God,
It's
yes.
that sort of. So when you talk about, this needs to be brought in by the CEO, I just
Mm-hmm.
wonder whether you experience that the type of organization that you worked for, startup versus more mature, perhaps, whether that had an influence on this CEO philosophy that you talked about just now.
I think that yes, this depends on how the CEO sees of what sales is going to do and how
Okay.
much the CEO kind of relies on their sales leadership, because that's another thing. The sales leader might be very into an enablement role and the CEO doesn't believe it. Then I
Yeah.
would say, okay, then there's a disconnect there. I had CEOs of companies that asked me, these startups, but what is enablement? Like, we don't get it. We don't get why
Yeah.
this is important. And I would tell them exactly what you said. Well, you can solve this problem many different ways, right? You need to sell and you have a quota and goals to achieve. You can
Yeah.
do different things. You increase the price, you ask people to sell more, you hire more people to sell the same amount, but you have it in more people, or
Yeah.
you make your people better. And the
Yeah.
way to make your people better is by bringing enablement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very interesting. So that's the first one, sort of
Yes.
having a CEO who really believes in it. And it's
Yes.
it's interesting. It's you use the word function, believes in the function, but you've also got this, is enablement a function or a philosophy? But maybe we'll come on to that question a bit later on. But okay, so what's the second?
The second learning is that we can be perfectionist in enablement. Things are going to fail. Things are not going to be pretty. Just like any startup when they're building a product, progress not perfection. Be agile and just do the things that you need to do and correct along the way, because you're not going to be able to build the perfect program or the perfect presentation or the perfect, I don't know, script or the
Yeah.
perfect coaching session, but you need to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is this not being able to do it to perfection? Is this with limitations of time or money or investment that you have to do some of the things that you want to do?
100, especially money.
Okay.
Who has budget and enablement? Very little people have, and very little people have a budget that will allow them to say, "Oh, this is my wish list, and I want all
Yeah.
these things. I want the tools, I want the people, and I want all these." So
Yeah. Yeah.
last year, actually, in the Sales Enablement Collective meeting in Toronto, I did a presentation called "From Analog to Digital." It was like,
Yeah.
how do you build anything in enablement using almost pen and paper? And pen and paper for us is, maybe a spreadsheet and your imagination.
Okay.
Because one thing that we have to be very good at is that we have to build things that are going to work in the analog world, so we can go show that there are results, show that people can do it, for us to be able to say, okay, now that I've proven it, can I have, for example, the money to buy a tool that will allow me to automate this process?
Okay.
Case in point, call intelligence tools, for example.
Yeah.
Um, so it is important to understand that you need to be scrappy. There's no marketing people that are going to come and help you build
Yeah.
something pretty. If you need to build a site, you're going to have to do it a lot yourself, and that is okay. That is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very difficult sort of demonstrating ROI with some of these activities that
Mm-hmm.
you can directly attribute, to a specific sort of action that's been taken, whether it's
That's
training or a tool. What's the ROI of call intelligence tools? I mean, it takes a while to collect the data, doesn't it?
it does,
And then to
but
analyze the data, but
but you bring a very important word in there. That's the attribution,
yeah,
and I I have to say that my maybe my third
yeah,
point is everything is measurable, and you need metrics and enablement. And this is like the biggest one. People
okay,
start to say, "Oh, but it's my NPR scores or my survey scores." No, 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 no. I am a big believer that people in surveys are not honest. So
hmm,
I'm very skeptical about survey results,
okay,
right? Because I have seen people do things mechanically for the sake of getting over with it.
right,
I need to understand if what I'm doing is really impacting the business. And sometimes those metrics are not going to be easy, and sometimes the correlation is not going to be perfect. But you need to really understand, if I am touching the sales team and I am taking an hour of their time, how did that make them better? Even if the correlation is not like, oh, thanks to enablement, they sold, 25% more, but
yeah,
what was the impact, right? So it is very important that for every effort that you do, you know what metric you are actually impacting. So for that, you need to understand your metrics. And for you to understand your metrics, you need to understand what's important for the business. And sometimes important for the business goes beyond what's important for the sales leader. So I invite enablers to really kind of understand their entire business, like the company,
hmm,
understand what is important for the business, and then say, how is sales influencing this? Because it is like a cascade, right? And how am I going to influence the salespeople? And I know that there's a lot of people that in enablement that might be scared of going there because it's a dark side, because sales ops is not, they're not very friendly, because I don't know, it's difficult to manage data and export it from the CRM. Again, just like we spoke about courage about immigration, be courageous with your numbers and your metrics. They're there.
Could you perhaps give one example of what you mean by sort of sort of collecting, knowing what the metrics are?
Yes. So, people understand, that typically the sales teams have the typical five metrics, right? The velocity, the sales velocity metrics. It's win
Mm,
rate, it is, a deal size, it is
mm,
ramp time, it's all the metrics that we know. But when we dissect those metrics and we really kind of understand, what does it really mean, for example, to increase win rate?
mhm,
Well, increased win rate does not happen by magic just because I want people to sell more and to make sure that they sell. Win rate happens when you have a healthier pipeline, right?
okay,
Because the win rate is just a percentage of the amount of deals that you close over the amount of deals you have in the pipeline. So,
mhm,
how do you start? So, how do you start with that? You go to the pipeline. So, when you go to the pipeline, you understand, what are we doing to really know that I have the deals that I am confident should be moving through the sales cycle.
mhm,
I am not saying you're going to be, you're not going to be a magician to know, oh, every deal that I bring in is going to close. But the early stages of the sales cycle is where you can control that
mhm,
those deals deserve to be in your sales cycle. When you see it that way and you teach your teams to actually be more, I would say, to fine tune their skills for like a discovery and a demo phase, or early
mm,
stages of the sales cycle, then they will understand that just because they have an inflated pipeline, that does not make them a better salesperson. So
Hmm.
when we talk about the influences of enablement, one metric that I would say there is not, oh, did we increase the win rate? That's great. But for me as an enabler was, did I increase the amount of opportunities
Hmm.
that went from discovery to close? One,
Okay.
did I also, and this is a metric that I have shared this metric in many places, and people look at me like I'm crazy, and I say, did you increase the percentage of opportunities that go from discovery to close lost? Think
Okay.
about it, right? You need to lose the opportunities in the discovery phase. Do not wait for them to be on stage 6 to lose them, because you can't control it there. So I would tell people where are the items that we can control, and we can help the salesperson control them. And
Hmm.
it's just changing the perception of what the sales cycle is. And it sounds very easy, and I know how hard it is,
Yeah.
and it is not an easy thing to do. But when you start to achieve that, then you get them comfortable in things like, let me listen to my calls, coach me on my calls, let's
Yeah.
do it again. Then they get more comfortable in the, let me go into my CRM files and understand, do I have all the information that I need? You start to get them comfortable with the process, not the other way around. Because what do we typically do? You're not updating the CRM, you're not listening to your calls, but they ask, but what for? I have pipeline. I have a bunch of pipeline. I don't need to do it. Yeah, but is that pipeline converting? So I think
Mm.
that when you look at the process that way, again, Phil, as we were
Yeah.
talking, so looking at it as an engineer, I'm looking at it
Yeah.
as a
Well, I was
process.
just saying, I can see your engineering background coming out of the way you're talking.
I
So,
think that's what makes it better at the end.
yeah, it is interesting, and I think that from a number of people I've spoken to in your field of sales enablement and in sales ops, quite often some of them have had some sort of a mathematical background at a very high level, and
Mm-hmm.
the way they look at data is very different to where salespeople look at data. The way they look at probability ratios is very different. you know
Yes.
and I think that I think perhaps generally salespeople are notorious of perhaps being over optimistic uh,
Yeah.
on sort of their deals that they're sort of managing, and find it difficult to extricate the emotional side of looking at deals and the just sheer number side, you know, uh, as well. But that's in itself is perhaps another topic to talk about.
100%. That is a great topic to talk about, because I think that that's where the scare to numbers might come
Yeah,
from.
yeah,
But
yeah,
and
yeah.
again, another topic.
It's just, I mean, it's very, once you close a deal, it's very interesting how your attitudes to pipeline change. You think all the deals are going to close because you're on that winning streak. But, when you lose a deal, then you start to think, which you are hoping to win. You start to think, oh gosh, how strong are all the deals that I've
Yes,
got?
exactly.
But I think it is a numbers game at the end of the day, and
It is. It
yeah.
is.
But it's helpful to have that. It's a bit like Daniel Kahneman's work on thinking slow and fast. I don't know if you've read his book.
Many a while ago, but yes.
Yes, it's really a while ago, but I just love the book because
Yeah.
it describes two modes of thinking.
Yes.
So okay, really really interesting to hear your points of view. You talked about three sort of key learnings, and you've possibly forgotten the original question. What are your key learnings? But are there any others that for you that you'd like to talk about?
I mean, it comes then comes a lot of the other ones. I think another key learning is learn how to say no very early. Enablers, we tend to have the personality of people that we want to help, right? I have
Yeah.
not met an enabler that is not willing to help. And
Okay.
I would say that the best testament to that is the societies and the amount of groups of enablers that are
Yeah.
out there, right? We have
Yeah.
groups like the Sales Enablement Society, the Sales Enablement Collective, the Sales Enablement Squad, the Women in Sales Enablement. And I
Yeah.
have not been in a conversation in any of these where 50 people jump to give you
Yeah.
advice or to help you
Yeah.
or to jump on a call with you. It is a beautiful place to be because we are a very collaborative, kind, but
Yeah.
that also comes with the downfall that then people start to take advantage of that when you're in a
Yeah.
company. So one thing I learned too was how to say no very early.
Right.
And sometimes you have to say no to your leadership,
Hmm.
especially when leadership will always think they have the solution to the problem.
Yeah.
And you have to say, no, I disagree with that. And this is why. I have an anecdote of a sales leader who tried to say that in order for a BDR to ramp, they had to do in 3 weeks, I think they had to achieve something like 13 meetings. And I
Okay.
told him that is basically impossible. And he said, no, it's not. And the numbers are here and I need them to do 13 meetings. So I came with my numbers and I said, here's the historic data of the last 6 classes we have had. And nobody has done over 5. And here are your top performers who nowadays are just like giving meetings like crazy. And this is where they started. So we are doing 4, and that is the ramp metric. And I was very adamant of not moving it. So he actually had to say in the meeting, okay, I do not agree with that, but we will leave it there. And then after we had more classes, he had to say, you were right, and trying to pressure people to do more is a mistake. It was
Yeah.
it was a hard meeting, Phil. It was a very
It's
hard
not
meeting,
meeting.
but
But
yeah.
it is quite interesting because I think part of the challenge with some of these emerging practices around sales enablement and is that quite a number, fewer perhaps now than there used to be, but quite a
Mhm.
number of the people involved in very senior sort of sales leadership roles, sales VP roles, have come from a history of sales, which was very much just as you've described. I mean, I remember when and so they are modeling what they think they need for new salespeople to do based on their own personal kind of background and experience in sales and
Yes.
sort of old systems thinking versus new systems thinking, and it's amazing. It's extraordinary. I mean, we come across clients of ours who have certain sales performance related issues. It doesn't happen so much now, but it does happen still, where they say, I've got a problem with sales performance. We need to teach our salespeople to close the deal. So can you run workshops on closing the deal? Closing the sale.
Yeah.
And I sort of shudder a little bit when you sort of ask the question, because that the problem is not on that won't be solved with sort of closing techniques or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Because the
Yeah,
problem is at the beginning, and
as
it's
it is
interesting.
at the beginning. Yeah,
It's interesting when these sales leaders say, "We need a better negotiation training."
I
I'm
know.
like, "Great. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? People are not
Yeah,
closing. Good.
yeah,
Why are we not closing?"
correct.
And you have to dig. You have to dig and you have to ask questions. I always tell other enablers, and when I had a team and when I was training a team, I said, you need to do discovery questions just like you would be in a discovery call as a salesperson. You
Mm,
need to go deeper and deeper and deeper to understand the root cause,
yeah.
because I would say that 99% of the times the issue that is happening is
Mm,
not where you think it is right
it
now.
is. Yeah, yeah. No, it's so interesting. You sort of share the same thoughts, same
Yes.
thoughts as we do. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you'd like to share on key learnings?
Key learnings.
Try and squeeze
I
everything
think
into
it's
you.
interesting. I think another one is very important is don't take anything personal.
Okay.
Because it's kind of like a sensitive environment. You're with a sales team. I had a leader in a company that said, when things go wrong, everybody blames enablement. When things go right, nobody remembers them. And it
Yeah.
is true. It is true. It's like, I don't know, it's like being a mother, Nobody gives you thank you until it's Mother's Day and you get flowers. Um, but to be honest, just because people don't say thank you, a lot, just because people might blame you for things, just because people might not remember, in their speech, when the top performer gets their President's Club award and they don't say, oh, thank you, Sally, for all the time you spent with me coaching, they are not going to remember you. And
Hmm.
that is okay. And when things go wrong and they start to say it's your program, it is not you. It's not a reflection of you. It is again a reflection of, okay, why don't we sit down and understand what was the issue here? So
Hmm.
having that mentality, I read a book a few years ago. A leader I had recommended it to me, and I recommend it all the time. It's called Black Box Thinking by
Hmm.
Matthew Syed. I love that
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
I've read it 3 times,
yeah.
and it's a great way to understand that for you, in order to fix things, you have to go back and see where were the mistakes, and now let's learn from them. Let's really learn from what happened. Let's not put let's not avoid what happened and start over again, right? So don't take it personal. You're doing a great job. There is going to be one or two reps on the floor that will always come and say thank you and will say, thanks to you, I was able to do this.
Hmm.
And even if they don't do it, know that if your team is moving forward, if the metrics are being met and things are happening, you are doing an amazing job. And
Hmm.
don't let anybody let you think otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Yes, Matthew. Yeah, yeah. Syed is a great table tennis player, as you probably know. Did you know that?
Mm-mm.
You didn't.
I did
Yes,
not know that.
he was a British national table tennis champion,
Oh, wow. Amazing.
and he's now, of course, a great journalist and a great author. And yeah, he's one of my favorite authors as well. Yeah. So can we talk about you've joined a new well, it's not a new organization, but you've got a new role back in an organization you've worked at before. And I guess you now, with the experience that you've had of so much learning from different organizations, um, sort of what how do you see the future for sales enablement, and what do you see, what's your vision for sales enablement, perhaps as you see it being applied in the new environment in which you're now working, if it's possible to share, but
A
maybe
hundred
it's too early.
percent.
Okay.
So I feel enablement as a whole is going to evolve into having enablement in different departments. And I'm seeing it in several companies. Our company currently, we have enablement in several departments. And
Okay.
one example is myself. I am now leading enablement for a team of product and engineers. So
Okay.
it is the other side of the company. It is the product managers, the software developers, the architects. It is people that traditionally, an enabler has not touched them, right? They have
Okay.
been usually training and onboarding and all that for these teams happen at the manager level. But
Okay.
now the structure of sales enablement has been so meaningful for the company that they said, we need that here. So
Yeah.
this is how this came along. My leadership currently said, we need what this structure that we have in sales enablement. We need to replicate it in other places because
Okay.
they see the benefit. So again, we go to the fact of have a leader that believes in enablement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
CEO and my executive leadership team believe in enablement highly.
Yeah.
So, not only that, now we're opening enablement in other areas. And you would say, well, what does that have to do with sales enablement? Well,
Yeah.
the impact that you're doing is so important that if the other sides of the company want to have you there, it means you're doing something good. So I think that sales enablement is, there's many places that are now gathering it as revenue enablement because
Yeah.
they have, the customer successes team and the BDR teams and the sales teams. There's some companies that are maybe separating sales enablement from maybe customer success enablement. But I think that we're evolving, as to your point, we were talking about function or philosophy.
Yeah.
I think these things are evolving to the fact that every department is needing an enabler, which for me comes to think that I would joke in the societies and the conversations, we always joke about, how about the chief enablement officer? That sounds like a great title. So if we think about it and every function wants to
Yeah.
replicate what sales enablement has done, I think I see a future where we can have an enabler sitting in the C
Yeah.
level. Why not?
Yeah. Why not? Yes, it's interesting. So even though you are working with the product engineers, I think you said,
Hmm.
and people that are normally sort of associated with slightly sort of behind the scenes activity, is there still a connection with sales and what you're doing? But you're having to deal with a community of different types of functions and so on, or are you simply not simply in a derogative sense, are you taking the frameworks that you've done for sales enablement and applying it to other functions?
I am actually, it's funny because when I have been doing in the last few weeks, I have been doing a lot of discovery to understand how
Yeah,
does this side of the company work and what would work for them.
yeah,
Interesting enough, at the beginning, somebody told me, oh, to find metrics here is going to be impossible.
okay,
I'm like, no, it's not impossible. It's just that they're hiding somewhere.
okay,
So I applied kind of like that same mindset and I discovered metrics. I discovered a way to get them.
yeah,
I discovered that applying a framework that, some people call it an enablement charter, some people
yeah,
call it an enablement framework, that I have applied different in other places. I realized people are actually very receptive of having that framework here,
okay,
especially because things have been very disassociated. Some teams were doing things, some teams were not. Onboarding was very loose. And
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
how about if we put all this in a very pretty process? We give everybody a journey and we make people feel like we got them and we understand what they need. What would that influence in terms of
mm,
them not only doing their job, but in their journey in the company, right? Because now one thing that is very different is the way that people on this department are motivated, different than salespeople. I
okay.
tell a salesperson, I'm going to put a metric of who makes the most discovery calls, and I'm going to put a leaderboard, and they're all for it,
Yeah,
right? I say that to an engineer, and they're going to look at me sideways and continue doing what they're doing. They do not care,
yeah,
right? But if you learn how people are incentivized and what they're doing every day, and what does that mean to the big picture, then you can actually build that framework with those incentives along the way. So things, for example, that I have seen is it is important for the engineering side to understand how the product is sold. It is important for the engineering side to understand what our customers are doing with the product.
right,
So I am seeing the things that they're missing. And
yeah,
I'm thinking, how would this impact the way they create the products? Right. And I was using
yeah,
an analogy of a house the other day. I said, if I am building a house and I'm only building the bathroom, I only know bathroom, but
yeah,
I do not understand the importance of the bathroom within the house,
yeah,
right? So that is kind of like what I'm doing. And yes, there's a lot of the frameworks and the ideas that you can bring to other areas. You just need to understand how you apply them.
we had on a recent podcast Andy Raskin. Have you heard of Andy Raskin
I've
at all?
heard of Andy. Do I
Yeah,
know Andy?
he's yeah, he's had a well, yes, he has this concept called the strategic narrative, and he's on one of our podcasts, and I think you might find him quite interesting to listen to.
I would
But
love to. Yeah.
one of the things that the reason why I'm mentioning Andy was because um, he he has through various reasons, through failure mainly, failure
Yeah.
to start his own. He was involved in a startup. He went to pitch for venture capital, and he got this feedback early on in his in the pitching process that he had the feedback from one of the venture capital institutions saying this is one of the worst presentations I've ever heard. He had this sort of feedback, so he got very interested in the what he's defined as the strategic narrative. He went off to journalist school to understand about creating narratives. He studied people who've written scripts for Pixar, I believe, and so on. But he's interested in the storytelling, and he's come to the conclusion that where this starts is with the sales deck, because
Yeah.
the sales deck is where the rubber hits the road. So everything that you do links back to narrative the story that you want to tell, the disruption you may want to create in the way you tell the story starts there. And it starts there, but then it works back throughout the organization through marketing. So it doesn't start with marketing. It doesn't start with product marketing. It starts with the sales deck, which
Mm-hmm.
is which is very interesting. And sort of hearing you talk now about linking what the product engineering teams are doing, linking it back to what customers want, is very much kind of supporting that notion of connecting customer to functions that go deep inside a company, and hopefully connecting the dots and
Yeah.
creating better products and better solutions and whatever it might be that
And
you.
really, and understanding, like, I'm
Yeah,
building this piece of this product, but how does it affect the person who uses
yeah,
it? And
yeah,
I have seen engineers kind of light up when they understand that and say,
yeah,
wow,
yeah,
that makes me want to build things like, with another mindset, right? Like build
yeah,
things.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yes, you mentioned the word mindset. So much of this sort of comes back to mindset, and
Mm.
it's a topic that's very close to my heart as well, given the doctoral research that I've done on the topic. But okay, well, I'm realizing that we're getting close to kind of finishing time here. The time has literally
We're
gone
having too
so
much fun, Phil. This is
much fun.
why.
No, it was really good fun. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I don't quite know, sort of what to say, apart from to thank you for giving us your time to share your insights on this important topic. Um, there's one thing that I just wanted to reflect on, which is
Yes.
your comment about communities of practice, and you talk about the way the sales enablement community have become incredibly supportive.
Yeah.
You don't see that so much in sales, do you?
No, you don't.
You don't.
Sales, I mean, there are some sales communities,
Yeah,
there that I have followed. There's some salespeople that kind of bring this audience and get them, but
yeah.
there's not that collaborative
I don't.
nature.
No, it's
No.
it's very sort of individualistic, and
Yes.
it's very hard to create this sort of community of practice, and it's something that we've been working on. But I've noticed in the sales enablement field, I think you've really, I agree with you. You've got a group of people in that sector who are pushing boundaries, who are being innovative, sharing ideas. It's just amazing to see. So yeah, I think I hope, like you said earlier, that there could be the future, the chief enablement officer. Wouldn't that be
I
one?
really think that will happen. I think that there are some companies that are paving the way for that. I
Okay.
am very proud to work in a company that believes in
Yeah.
enablement this much.
Yeah.
And we do bring benefits to the company and to the teams
Yeah.
that we touch. So yeah, why not?
Okay. Why not?
Why not?
Okay. Well, on that note, perhaps we could call it a day. So thank you very much,
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate
Adriana.
you having me here on the
Yeah.
podcast, and happy to come back and happy to
Exactly.
continue
No, no.
collaborating.
I think we will be. I feel as though we've only got a quarter of the story. So, but thank you for being so generous with your time. And also, I know that you're not feeling 100%, but it certainly doesn't come across that you're feeling
I
poorly.
know, because I'm talking with you on a topic I'm very passionate about. So suddenly it felt like, where is that headache? Where's the sore throat? I
Is
might
it?
feel my voice is a little bit more raspy today, but
Is it?
when you love something, you do it. You
That's
just,
good.
you just do it.
That's
It's
good.
passion.
It certainly comes across. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah. Cheerio.